There is no tomorrow. There is no tomorrow. There is no tomorrow.
All right, we are recording, and this is a long time coming. I'm talking to Michael J. Whelan. People don't know who I am. Most people, many people might not know who you are. You have a long list in the TV game, and I'll just say what it says on your Facebook. You're a former producer with the Olympics. You're the former VP of the Golf Channel. But what I really want to talk about are your HBO days. You were a producer, writer, director of sports production at HBO, and you and I share that in common. I was at HBO from 1999 to 2014, and I had to tell you, and I'm going to let you give your years at HBO, but I always knew who you were even before I started working at HBO, because if you remember, the end of the telecast, someone would always say a few words like, our telecast was brought to you by Ross Greenberg, and he would say a few names, and your name was always in those credits.
Tyson versus Douglas was directed by Mark Payton. The replay producers were Rick Bernstein and Mike Whelan.
So I knew who you were before I worked for HBO. Then when I got to HBO, you were like a legendary figure for the pieces and the features that you did. So, man, it's so good to talk to you. Well, tell me, first of all, you said you were at HBO from 1982 to 94?
Yeah, George, I'm actually shocked, and this happens when you get as old as I am. Man, I would have sworn that we were together for many of those years. I feel like our relationship is such that we spent a lot more time than what we did. Thank you for reminding me that I've got a little early stage dementia here, but yeah, I came to HBO. I was not rehired by CBS in '92, and was let go and had no idea what the hell I was ever going to do again. And then out of the blue, I get a phone call from HBO that says, we're looking for a production assistant for 14 days to work on a marvelous Marvin Hagler fight. Would you be interested? And I said, absolutely yes. So at the time, HBO was still in the Time Life building. It hadn't even gone down to the HBO building. And I came in and I interviewed with Seth and Ross,
Seth Abraham, Ross Greenberg.
Yeah, and Ross at the time was the executive producer, and we hit it off. They hired me. It was like it was Hagler, Mustafa, I think, and I was Ham Show, and I was there for 14 days, and thought that I was going to pack up my bags and. Got Lord knows what was going to happen. And Ross said, you want to stick around for a few more shows? I said yes, and ended up staying there for almost 13 years.
Wow. And I mean, when you were there, HBO was, HBO obviously is legendary in the boxing game, and even the years I was there. But to me, you were there in those early years when it was built up and just became this juggernaut. And one of the reasons why I really want to talk to you, when people hear I worked for HBO, their eyes open up and they want to talk about fighters I talked to, and which is great. But you were there when it was Hagler and Sugar Ray Leonard and George Foreman and Mike Tyson. I just have pictures of those guys on my wall. You've sent me pictures, and I'm going to get them in this piece. You've sent me pictures of you and Tyson and you and Sugar Ray. So, man, I'm so excited. I mean, I don't even know where to start, but how is it that you became friendly with these guys, and tell me some of the friendships and like some of the bigger memories you have of back then working with these fighters.
Yeah, I think it was just a different time. I think, back in the early 80s when I started with Ross Greenberg, Rick Bernstein, HBO was king of the hill.
Yep.
When it came to boxing, as you mentioned earlier, so eloquently, I think you could not mention boxing without a HBO in there. It was just synonymous. They went together like peanut butter and jelly. I think what Seth Abraham, and I think what Ross, and I think Tim Brain, who was one of the early executives there, was so instrumental in taking a sport and making it into a must-see TV event. The 80s were so much different, and the reason being is there was no dilution of all of these networks as there is today. The streaming, the cable. Back then, you had NBC, ABC, CBS, and you had HBO. Outside of that, there wasn't much more. So when HBO did an event, it transcended boxing. People who weren't necessarily sports fans or boxing fans knew who Sugar Ray Leonard was, and knew who Larry Holmes was, and knew who Marvin Hagler was. And I think a lot of it had to do with the way the progression of boxing on television took place. There wasn't pay-per-view as we know it today. You fought a couple of fights on CBS, you built up an audience, you built up a name, and then as it got bigger, what would happen is it would get lateraled off to HBO for that big pay-per-view event on a Friday night. So, the names were well known to everybody. Back in the 80s, I mean, who doesn't remember Sugar Ray Leonard and the 7-Up commercial? Who doesn't remember Ali? Marvelous Marvin Hagler out of Brockton. Hector Camacho. It was just an incredible thing. How I got to know them is that in the early days, I was assigned as the feature producer.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the entire year, my job was just to travel to these training camps. And I just got to know them. I love talking to people. I've always been in the sports world. It goes back to my dad being with the Knicks and with the Pirates. So, for some reason, I was easy to like. I was non-threatening. I was always interested in these people's lives beyond the sport. I didn't idolize them in such a way. So, Ray and I, Marvin, Holmes, Camacho, Mike and I mean, it wasn't just going there and shooting a couple of hours of B-roll and we'd go out to dinner after and we'd hang out, and Ray and I would play golf, and, Mike would give me a call and Ray would, we had a real relationship that was obviously predicated on boxing, but I became somebody who they could trust, not with things that were going on in their lives, as many of those pictures sort of show that it was more than just let's snap a picture in the ring. I played a small role representing HBO, and it was just a great time.
I mean, and you sent me many pictures, and like you said, it wasn't you in a ring with Mike. It was you just somewhere hanging out with Mike or George Foreman. Hector Camacho. Then let's start there. Hector Camacho was Sugar Ray Leonard was my favorite fighter growing up. I literally wanted to be him. And then he retired like 8,000 times. And Hector Camacho came on the scene, and people thought he was going to be the next Sugar Ray Leonard. Good looking kid, hand speed, good power. He was funny. What was it like?
Crazy as a June bug.
What was it? Because he was crazy, but you were around him. What are some, and I know you can only say so much, but what are some times you had with Hector that stood out? And was he really as crazy as you read about?
Yeah. Times 10. I remember producing one of the earlier events in Los Angeles. Actually, it started off as a horror story. It was one of the first major shows that I did as a feature producer, and I remember going down and meeting Hector for the first time, and we spent a day or two. I came back and we realized that there was no audio recorded to the 2 days that I spent with him. And after almost, getting screamed at by Ross Greenberg for 2 days, I had to go back down to Los Angeles and redo everything. But Hector Camacho was probably one of the, if there was a Liberace of boxing, it was Hector Camacho. The way he dressed, the way he acted, the way he thought about himself, the way he treated people. Hector was, I thought Hector would be the next Sugar Ray Leonard. Unfortunately, I think Hector had a lot of issues that never allowed him to become the boxer he could have been. But a lot of these guys, after shooting with Hector, I remember going and spending out and having dinner with Hector at the Ivy with celebrities in Los Angeles, and he and I would just hang out till 2 or 3 in the morning, eating and drinking and partying and having a good time, and and Hector and I actually had a fabulous relationship all the way up until his death. Wow. He moved to Orlando, Florida, where I happen to be right now. And every week, Hector and I would get together at Starbucks, and I try to keep him on focus a little bit, but he was far from being a non-linear individual when talking about anything. But Hector was a fabulous guy who had a wonderful heart, had a lot of issues. But boy, in the 80s, when he got into the ring and he did that, quick shadow boxing and ran around the ring.
They say that this outfit cost $8,000. Understated, don't you think? Yeah. My response is, I wonder in the new tax bill whether he's going to need an exemption to get a write-off.
The arena just lit up, and it rocked where you could probably measure it as a Richter scale somewhere, and and so did Larry Holmes, and so did Sugar Ray Leonard, and so did when Marvelous came in, and so did when Mike Tyson came in, and when Julio Cesar Chavez and Pernell Whitaker and all of these guys. These are just names that many people may or may not know today, but some of the fights that they had on HBO were incredible. just absolutely, they were incredible. I every now and then I still dream of the Taylor Chavez fight, where Taylor had Chavez beat, and frickin' Lou Duva, instead of telling Meldrick to hide in the corner, said go out and punch with him, and what was it? 10 seconds left in the round.
Less than that, I think.
Yeah, gets knocked down, and Richard Steele counts. It was just some absolute brawls.
if he gets up, he probably wins the fight. I can't believe it.
Unbelievable. Richard Steele stopped the fight with fewer than 5 seconds to go. You're going to watch Lou Duva go crazy now.
Mike Tyson, nobody ever liked him. When he walked into that ring without a robe and without socks, and the place was just, it was like Madison Square Garden in the 60s when the Knicks ruled the world. I mean, it was just, and I think a lot of it had to do with great promoters. I think Don King was beneficial. I think Butch Lewis was. I think Bob Arum. I think they knew how to set it up, and the fighters just did their thing. But man, an HBO fight was just George. It was just electric.
I know it was, and I'm saying that from afar. I'm a kid watching these fights. Mike, when you start throwing those names out, you make my head spin. Purnell and all those names, because you spent time with these guys. Well, let me flash forward to my favorite fighter, Sugar Ray Leonard, who, if people don't remember, Sugar Ray was also a broadcaster. He called the fights with Barry, Tompkins, and Larry. So you describe your relationship with Sugar Ray and some of the times you had, because back then, it's hard to put into perspective what kind of a star he was for people now. But he was it back then. When I would walk into a restaurant or a club with Ray Leonard, the sea would open up, and Ray would bring the house down. Everybody wanted to be around Ray Leonard. He just, I think, I mean, you would know this better than I did, but I think as far as magnetism, I don't think there was anybody as exciting, as good looking. And Ray Leonard and a lot of these fighters knew how to work the room. They knew how to promote not just themselves, but the game. And Ray just had a great team around him with Mike Traynor, and Dundee and all these people. But Ray and I became extremely close for well over, almost 2 decades. We would always hang out at the Alexis Park Hotel in Las Vegas, and Ray loved to play tennis, and he loved to play golf, and he loved going out. And yeah, that was back in the days when Barry Tompkins and Ray Leonard. It doesn't get much better than having Sugar Ray Leonard. Ray would have been there forever had he not signed a deal to go to Showtime. Instead of taking the fight to HBO. Yep. I really didn't know the real reasoning behind that. If it was just to shove it to HBO or what the deal was, but when he did his comeback and went to Showtime, and HBO made a decision to part ways, and they let him go. And I'm not quite sure if it was either Roy Jones they brought in at the time, or I don't know if it was George they brought in. I'm not sure the chronology. Yeah, it might have been George, but I think the fight you're talking about was Terry Norris, and that ended up being on Showtime.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
It is right around that time where George Foreman, I remember somewhere in there, Foreman came, but I do remember the story of why HBO and Sugar Ray parted ways. But Mike, you what back then? Your everyday life was, I'm hanging out with Sugar Ray. Sugar Ray Leonard's my friend, and Hector Camacho is my friend. And I mean, when you're hanging out with Sugar Ray Leonard, do you ever have that moment where you say, "Holy shit, I'm hanging out with Sugar Ray Leonard," or was that's just how your life was?
That's just what we did. I mean, it's look. In the beginning, yes, but after a while, we became very, very good friends, and we enjoyed each other's company. We were both young. We loved going out. We loved having a good time, a lot of stories which I will take to my grave with me. But you know, it's the same thing. It was the same thing with George, and you know, George and I became very, very, very dear friends. The reason that George and I became good friends is that, you know, back in the late 80s, early 90s, you know, I came up with the idea of doing a feature of George Foreman running for president.
But this year, with the American public rallying behind me, I knew it was time to pursue my final dream. Yeah, that's gonna look real good hanging right there.
Mr. Foreman, one question, please. George, please. Do you seriously think you have any chance against Bill Clinton or George Bush?
Let me make myself perfectly clear. Number one, as for Bill Clinton, I'll just punch him right out of the race. And George Bush, I'll belly bump him right out of the White House. Need I say anything more? I can see it so clearly. Me, George Foreman, the President of the United States. I can and I will be the best president this country has ever seen.
George.
I remember it well.
And it was a you know, it usually a 1-day shoot turned into a 3 or a 4-day shoot, and George just enjoyed it so much that, you know, he would often just call me up, see how I'm doing. You know, back in the I think it may have been the middle of '90s. I had come down with a stage of prostate cancer at the time. And George was kind enough while he was here in Orlando to give me a call, and we hooked up a little bit. And there's that great picture of George and I together. I had lost my hair. We were both pointing at our bald heads. But a lot of these guys really had a friendship with me.
Yeah.
You know, same thing with Marvin, same thing with Larry Holmes, Pinklin Thomas at the time. You know, getting calls from Tim Witherspoon, you know, a lot of these guys, it was just quite common for that to happen. Butch Lewis, you know, some of these people became great friends, and some of them not so much. But again, it was a different time that golf was not. Boxing was not infiltrated by the amount of programming that was on TV. It just, you know, it led up to a big fight because you could only see it once a month on HBO, and HBO promoted it. The boxers promoted it. It was just a special moment in the world of that sport.
I know you said there's a lot of stories you're going to take to your grave, and I respect that, but it's hard to put things in perspective with words sometimes. But we're talking about the 1980s, and we're talking about you hanging out with guys like Sugar Ray Leonard, who, again, he was an icon, a star then. Without like giving, I don't need the salacious stories. Everyone wants those, but I know you respect the guys you hung out with. But how crazy were those times back then in the 80s when you're hanging out with a guy like Sugar Ray?
Well, I think any time that you can be a part of the celebrity world to see what that's like, it's fascinating to a lot of people. I was young then. I was in my 20s. I was, you know, single. It was, you know, we would go out and, you know, regardless of where we were, it was a party, you know, from early morning to the end of the night. We knew how to do our job, but we sure had a whole hell of a lot of fun. You know, same thing with Mike Tyson up until he left Jimmy Jacobs and Cuss, and up until he hooked up with Don King. Yeah. Mike and I had great relationships. Hell, I remember going out to dinner with Mike maybe a week after he got married with Robin Givens, and having Mike almost with his hands in his head, wondering what the hell he had just did. You know, and he pretty much said to me back in those days, have you ever wanted to sleep with somebody so badly that you married them? And I went, oh Christ, I don't think this is going to work out very well for you. But I enjoyed Mike. Mike was a great guy. He was kind to me. He was smart. He was interesting. He never had that thuggish demeanor about him. Other people's experiences are different. But when I was with him, he treated me very respectfully. I wish that cell phones were around in those days. Right. I remember the time when Rick and I went up there, and we actually got a chance to go into the ring and box with him a little bit. And I remember getting into going in there and putting on the gloves with Mike and just playing around and being amazed how quick and fast these athletes were, and how hard it felt when he tapped me on the shoulder or on my head a little bit. But those were the good old days. And, the same thing with Larry. And, all of these fighters would make their way up to the 11th floor at the HBO building. Yep. And, our promotions team, our boxing team, Ross and Seth, they just had a great way of learning how, again, to transcend these individuals into more than just a boxing audience. And, probably the greatest memories that stand out right now is, the Taylor Chavez fight will forever be one that just blew me away. The second one probably had to be, I would say, Tyson getting knocked out by Buster Douglas.
Inside Korakuen Stadium in Tokyo, Japan, as HBO Sports presents World Championship Boxing. Tonight, undisputed heavyweight champion Mike Tyson's 10th title defense against the challenger James Buster Douglas. It is scheduled for 12 rounds.